My name's Wendy McGuinness. I run a think tank in Wellington, New Zealand. I'm actually an accountant in training, really interested in foresight and risk management, and that's where I've spent most of my sort of career. So what I'm going to do is actually give you that perspective. Obviously, you will have heard a lot of material. I'm not sure exactly what you've heard or what you haven't, so I'm going to give you everything I've got, and then you'll have a PowerPoint which will be like a lookbook, so that you can go back and understand things. It seemed the most practical solution, hopefully most useful to you. Basically, the table of contents in the lookbook deals with some errors and inconsistencies that worry me, talking then about models and institutions, the importance of improving governance, and I go into a lot of detail in the strategic and operational recommendations. I then flip through very quickly some concepts, and then I talk about climate shocks. Now, obviously, to help you, and I understand the time, is I've put the Scottish documents in green, so it should be easy for you to find, and I've got the recommendations in the grey slide. I've got the written submission, a think piece, the Scottish Water Governance Directives 2009. Can I just check whether you guys have seen that? If you know about it. And the other thing is the Scottish Annual Report. I'll assume that you haven't, because I do think it will be useful for you. But you have also got a copy of it. So this is going to be fast and furious, so just know that the detail's all there. First thing, errors and inconsistencies. So I'm terribly concerned about the use of terms like public service delivery model, because I don't believe that the entities that have been created, in fact, they're intentionally excluded from the legislation and do not meet the definition of public service. And those inconsistencies actually fit right through the DIA material. I then talk about concern about using the term publicly owned, because once again, it's not considered to be owned. It's not shares, but they're really unit titles. And I sort of go through this process of saying, if you bring the term shares into this legislation, you're actually creating, I think, confusion around shareholdings, shares, companies act. So my expertise or knowledge, I suppose, is across a range of things like climate reporting and NZX and those sort of things. So I actually think you're in dangerous ground by muddying the waters of these really important strategic public accountability concepts. Sort of like think of the machinery of government and how much we've learned on that, but also think about it in terms of the way that we create this whole concept of public accountability. This concept saying that shares to provide a tangible expression, that is a completely flawed and should be challenged comment, because that is exactly it. It's not tangible. It's based on population. There's also the concepts like saying independent, competent-based professional board. If the board is chosen by the group, they are not independent of the group. And these are the sort of things, they seem little, but in terms of our long-term where we want to take this, it's terribly important that we get this language right. Now, there's a lot of debate. So this is the public sector model, and this is actually done by a PSC, and it's an old one and it's a good one, and it shows basically the government institutions. It's one I've always adored. On the green-hand side, you can see, once again, first time talking about the Scottish system. So the Scottish Water is a public sector body. And what's being advocated in this bill is not a public sector body. It is getting a ship, putting it out to harbour and setting it up to go and do whatever it's going to do. It is not publicly owned. It is not owned by a territorial. I just think terribly dangerous where you're going. So in terms of the New Zealand model, Scottish Water is actually a Crown entity. It's like ACC or Health NZ. It's subject to the scrutiny by Parliament and the Auditor General. And so it's actually understanding that I like the Scottish model. So this is what it looks like, reports straight up to the Scottish Parliament. This is out of their reference, their work. And you can kind of see all the different parties, and it explains the role on the right-hand side. There's a little graph there that actually is really important because it shows the timeline of their journey to get to Scottish Water. And what they did was they had in 76 they had the 12 regional. 96 they tried 3, and it didn't work. They couldn't get the efficiencies. So then they went to 2002 to 1. And I think, you've got to learn from other people. And I think that's really important point that I'll come back to. Sorry. Ways to improve governance. So these are the strategic ideas. I think one thing is you could establish a Minister for Water. I think terribly useful around the cabinet table. You've got sort of 68 different ministers. Why not have a Minister of Water? Easy, slam dunk, really brings the accountability and governance around the cabinet paper. Talked about create one, not four. So on the right-hand side is a graph that shows basically when in Scotland, those first 3 bars, the increase in average price of water over the time that they had the 3 entities. And then you can see on the right-hand bar is what they went from 03 to 2021. Almost no change. Now, I'm an accountant, so you naturally know you can get scale, you get bulk purchases, you control systems. The costs will fall, just drop, which is really what they were showing there. Beautiful example. I came up with 2 options that could easily move this entity back into the public sector. One, I'll talk about those really briefly. Obviously, a Water Services Council and a Crown entity, both options. There's a whole lot of little detail in there around, for example, flow-based charging systems. Broaden the purpose of the regulation is a biggie for me because the regulations are they kind of like give you an out, a really easy out, and they're far too narrow, particularly around the reporting, which I refer to, and also around risk management. There's also concerns around the rule of law. I'm not going to go into it, but it's there if you want to have a look, because I do worry about what you're proposing here, which is basically if you can, and I don't even think you can get the assets out of local government into this independent non-public sector body, what you're really doing is you're really creating a concept not actually dissimilar to what happened in the 80s, with Maori and Crown land. It creates, we'll have water tribunals, we'll have water claims. I think you need to be really careful. I'm not sure about the exact answer, but I've got a few ideas. So one was, we actually create a new local authority, which we call the Water Services Authority. Within the legislation, the Local Government Act, you can actually move, there's marked on that right-hand side, you can transfer water services to another local government organisation. So that could be this new Water Services Authority. Now, if you do that, you actually, your pace of change is really efficient. You deal with the fact that it's still in the public service, but it is managed as a separate entity. So it has a lot going for it. The other one, of course, is a Crown agent or a Crown entity company. Both of them are marked up there for you to consider. The operational recommendations are quite specific. I'm going to just race through a couple, but they're all there. First one is that water assets transferred from local councils should not be privatised. I think you need to put it in law. And if they're not used by the new entity, they should be returned to the relevant council, if you can manage that transition, I'm saying. The second thing is, I think you should have a statement that the water assets will be used to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitary for all New Zealanders. Great little placeholder, just really alerts everyone, puts some, stops some panic into the system. Second thing is require 2 independent climate expert board members to sit on all 4 boards. So these slides are assuming that you go for the 4-entity model that you've got. So you can go through all of those. I think there should be, if you're going to do these body corporates in the future, maybe a statutory body corporate register with the Companies Office. Then you've actually got a public accountability mechanism copying what we know already works for companies. And you can put all your memorandums, your constitutions, your minutes, your annual general meeting of these entities in a public, transparent way. So in other words, I'm saying, okay, I don't like what you're doing, but if you're going to do it, there's actually some fantastic checks and balances you can put into the system, and I'm trying to alert you to those. what the Constitution must contain. Constitution is interesting because you've actually created sections to say what is in the Constitution and what may be. And then you've also got your reporting obligations at the back end. I think you just need to be a bit aware that if you're going to put in the Constitution, you might want to put a statement in the Constitution. Requirements is to say that they actually meet the reporting requirements in the legislation. I'm not sure how those links work, but I think it's a little bit clumsy. Contents of annual reports, I'm not going to go through those, but you can kind of get the picture. Lots of transparency. I'm following very much the Scottish annual report, which is what you've got a copy of. This one is about governance relationship in regard to, this is referring to that directive document. Very much used, looks a flimsy little document in Scottish law, but it's actually, you'll see in the annual report, they actually refer to it and report against it. And so it's a really great little mechanism around improving those governance things.
Wendy McGuinness, we are well out of time, and I would like to take Helen White's questions. If you could wrap up shortly, please.
Okay, thank you. Climate change. So I've got some, at the moment, the entities do have no responsibility of the Climate Change Response Act. So we need to actually get the reporting mechanisms, and that's all there and in there. And I knew this had happened to me, and thank you very much, Madam Chair. Sorry.
Well, thank you so much. That's been a huge amount of work, obviously, and we really appreciate also an anticipation of receiving these slides. And I'll go now to Helen White's question.
Thank you.
And Wendy, thank you. It is a really good submission, and there's a lot there. So please forgive me for only asking about one little thing. I want to know what you think we could do to improve the accountability. What would be your top pick in terms of improving? Because you're talking about Scottish Water being very different and being a much more public entity with sort of one scale out. I can see all that. What would you do if you just want one thing that's going to make that accountability as a public entity better?
I would move it back into the public sector. It could be a Crown entity, or it could be in that local government. You need to, the machinery of government, I mean, I've been around for years, has been very well designed by the failures that have happened. So to try and actually patch it, which is what I'm sort of saying in my second lot of recommendations, is completely risky. I would prefer a really easy one is you pop it back into the public sector, you're done. The system will look after itself. It's designed to, bring in those controls. So a really good question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your submission, and please do make sure we get the slides if you request for them. Thank you very much, Wendy.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.